It began not with the atomic bomb, but with a match. Tokyo, March 9, 1945, a city of paper and dreams, a labyrinth of wooden homes and narrow alleys where families cooked rice over small stoves and children slept beneath futons patched by mothers' hands. That night, a low hum crept through the sky. At first, some mistook it for thunder, but what descended was not rain. It was fire. In less than 6 hours, over 100,000 people were gone. Their city turned into a sea of orange winds. The smell of charcoal and burned tatami mats drifted for miles. It was the deadliest night in human history. Yet few today remember it happened before Hiroshima ever saw a flash. That single night forces a question that has haunted every historian, every soldier, every citizen of the modern world. Was America seeking victory or vengeance? For decades, textbooks simplified it. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, America responded, and the world was set right again. But reality was never that tidy. The firebombing of Tokyo wasn't merely military strategy. It was emotional, psychological, almost ritualistic. A nation's collective anger condensed into gasoline and magnesium. It was the night the United States, a country born from rebellion and reason, unleashed a storm meant not to conquer, but to annihilate. Imagine standing in that cockpit, looking down at a city glowing in moonlight. Pilots were told their targets were industrial zones. In truth, Tokyo's industry was its people. Housewives stitching uniforms, old men crafting toy airplanes used for training, children collecting scrap metal. Major General Curtis LeMay, the man behind the campaign, famously said, "If we lose the war, we'll be tried as war criminals." He wasn't wrong. Yet, in the calculus of wartime America, efficiency replaced empathy. Fire became the most effective language of victory. The shock is not that such destruction occurred, it's that it was methodically planned, tested, and celebrated. In the months leading up to that night, American engineers built full-scale mock-ups of Japanese neighborhoods in Utah and bombed them repeatedly to study how flames would spread through tatami, bamboo, and pine. The project was led by Harvard chemists, funded by Washington, and applauded by generals. The goal was precision, to perfect the art of burning human civilization. It sounds monstrous now, but in the logic of total war, science became theology, and destruction, salvation. Here's the paradox. America had the power to crush Japan without mercy, yet justified it as mercy itself. The official narrative declared that ending the war swiftly would save lives, both American and Japanese. And indeed, Japan's militarists had vowed to fight to the last man. But beneath that moral calculus lingered something older, darker, the human need for retribution. After Pearl Harbor, after the Bataan Death March, after years of propaganda portraying the Japanese as inhuman, the United States wanted not only surrender, it wanted catharsis. The firestorm over Tokyo was vengeance, wearing the mask of strategy. In the glow of those flames, a strange kind of modernity was born. For the first time, war was waged not against armies, but against the idea of a nation itself, its workers, its culture, its spirit. Cities became laboratories for destruction. The sky became a weapon. And from those ashes rose a new truth. Whoever controlled the air controlled the story. It's a truth that echoes through every modern conflict, from the deserts of the Middle East to the digital battles of our age. To understand that night is to understand how vengeance can masquerade as justice. The bombs that fell on Tokyo were smaller than the atomic ones, yet more intimate. The pilots could see the faces below, the movement of crowds, the spreading chaos. And when dawn came, reporters described the city as boiled people, burned people, people melted together. Those were not enemies. They were civilians, citizens of a defeated empire that had not yet fallen. Still, America called it progress. The newspapers celebrated efficiency. 80,000 dead in one raid. A victory of logistics, not humanity. Yet history's irony is that the same fire that destroyed Japan also forged the conscience of modern America. Photographs of the burned children circulated among soldiers. Some wept, others justified it. But a seed was planted, a doubt that would later haunt the men who built the bomb and the presidents who used it. That doubt became a mirror reflecting the question we still ask today. How far can a democracy go in defending itself before it becomes the very thing it fights? It's easy now, decades later, to see the black and white images and assume inevitability. But imagine this. What if the United States had chosen patience instead of punishment? What if diplomacy, not fire, had ended the war? Would the Cold War have been colder, the nuclear arms race less urgent, our moral compass less scorched? We'll never know. History doesn't reveal its alternate endings, only the consequences of the ones we chose. Tokyo's ashes weren't just the remains of a city. They were the foundation of a new world order. From them rose an America both admired and feared, a superpower that believed peace could be engineered through overwhelming force. But beneath that confidence smoldered guilt, unspoken yet persistent. The night the sun fell over Japan was also the night America's innocence burned away. And perhaps that's why the story still matters. Because every drone strike, every surgical operation, every act of technological warfare carries a whisper from that fiery night. We've done this before. We may have changed the tools, but not the impulse. The need to control, to retaliate, to end chaos by creating a greater one. It's the same fire, dressed in new uniforms. So when we look at that grainy photograph of Tokyo glowing like a second sunrise, we aren't just looking at history. We're looking at ourselves, our capacity for innovation and destruction, our brilliance and blindness intertwined. The night America chose fire over peace didn't just reshape Japan. It reshaped what it meant to be human in the age of total war. The smell of smoke lingered for weeks. Survivors described it as the scent of the end of the world. But for the planners in Washington, it was the scent of success. The machinery of vengeance had done its job, and the sun, though it rose again, did so over a planet forever changed. By the spring of 1945, the United States had mastered a terrifying new science, the art of burning cities. What began as tactical necessity had evolved into a doctrine, coldly efficient and strangely personal. To understand how this transformation occurred, one must enter the mind of a nation pushed to the edge, a society that believed redemption could be measured in tonnage dropped from the sky. Fire, once a symbol of purification, became America's most persuasive argument. At the heart of that transformation stood Curtis LeMay, a man whose square jaw and unblinking stare seemed carved from the same metal as his bombers. LeMay didn't speak of glory, he spoke of results. His belief was simple and ruthless. Wars were won by breaking the enemy's ability to function as a society. If that meant erasing their cities, so be it. He famously told his crews, "You've got to kill people, and when you've killed enough, they stop fighting." It was brutal honesty in a world that still preferred the illusion of chivalry. LeMay wasn't evil, He was efficient, the perfect mirror for America's mood after Pearl Harbor. That mood was vengeance disguised as righteousness. 4 years earlier, the Japanese had turned the tranquil waters of Hawaii into a graveyard. Americans who woke to news of the attack felt a wound so deep it redefined their identity. Before the war, the U.S. had been isolationist, self-absorbed, wrapped in its Depression-era struggles. After Pearl Harbor, it became a machine. Factories that once built cars now built bombers. Housewives rolled bandages, schoolchildren collected scrap, and movie stars sold war bonds. The entire country pulsed with a singular rhythm: payback. Every B-29 that rose from the Pacific Islands carried not just explosives, but the fury of a nation betrayed. Yet revenge has a strange way of reshaping those who wield it. To defeat Japan, America had to understand Japan, not as a culture, but as a target. Analysts mapped the density of wooden housing, wind patterns, humidity, even the average spacing between homes. Psychologists advised on morale. Chemists designed new incendiaries that clung to skin and refused to extinguish. What emerged was an extraordinary synthesis of intellect and savagery, a partnership between academia and annihilation. The ivory towers of Harvard and MIT became silent accomplices in an inferno. It was war as laboratory experiment, morality measured in melting points. For Japan, the irony was cruel. The very modernization it had pursued for decades, the factories, the shipyards, the concentration of population in urban centers, made it fatally vulnerable. Tokyo was the perfect fire trap, a city built like a lantern waiting for a spark. And America, in its quest to end the war quickly, decided to light it. LeMay's campaign spread across Japan like a plague of flame. Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, each city turned to ash in turn. But behind the steel and firestorms were young men barely out of their 20s. Many of them had never seen Japan outside of the glowing maps in their briefing rooms. They didn't see faces, only coordinates. Yet some would later write in letters home that they could smell burning flesh even from 5,000 feet. Others confessed nightmares that followed them for years. The mission was clear, but the conscience blurred. Back in America, newspapers called them heroes. Hollywood celebrated their bravery. But in private, some officers began to question whether victory had replaced morality. A chaplain attached to a bomber unit wrote, "We tell ourselves this will end the war, but I wonder, what kind of peace are we preparing for?" His words, buried in the archives of the Air Force, captured a rare moment of clarity amid the smoke. The deeper tragedy was that the logic of fire worked. Japan's war production collapsed. Its morale crumbled. Families lived in constant fear of the night sirens. Children drew pictures of airplanes raining sparks like stars. And each successful raid made the next one seem inevitable, even necessary. In the cold arithmetic of strategy, destruction proved seductively persuasive. Why invade when you could incinerate from the sky? By the summer of 1945, America's bombers had reduced much of Japan to dust. Yet, its government refused to surrender. LeMay and his peers argued that one final demonstration of overwhelming force was needed, a strike so powerful that even the emperor would have no choice but to yield. This logic paved the runway for the atomic age. The firestorms were not only punishment, they were rehearsal. But before the atom came the ash. And in that ash, the United States learned something dangerous about itself: that moral limits, once crossed, are easily forgotten. When victory is defined by destruction, compassion becomes collateral damage. The same nation that built libraries and universities had also perfected the blueprint for urban annihilation. And it did so with a kind of detached pride, the pride of craftsmen who had built something astonishingly effective. To the ordinary American, these bombings were distant thunder, reported in headlines that celebrated progress. Few questioned what progress meant. It's easy to condemn from hindsight, but at the time, the war had normalized the unthinkable. Civilians were targets because they supported the war machine. Cities were legitimate because they produced tools of death. The moral lines blurred until they vanished entirely. Meanwhile, in Japan, the survivors crawled through charred ruins searching for water, their shadows etched onto the ground. Some would later recall the eerie silence after each raid, the stillness so profound it felt like the world had stopped breathing. In that silence, the mythology of invincibility shattered. Japan had awakened the sleeping giant, and now that giant was learning to wield fire like a god. If war reveals the true nature of nations, then America's nature in 1945 was paradoxical, inventive, moralistic, and merciless. The same ingenuity that built the Brooklyn Bridge and jazz music now engineered infernos that erased entire cities. LeMay's doctrine of efficiency echoed a broader truth about modern civilization. When technology outruns empathy, humanity burns in the exhaust. Even today, the echoes remain. Every military algorithm that calculates acceptable collateral damage descends from the logic of LeMay. Every satellite-guided missile traces its ancestry to those bombers over Tokyo. The modern world's comfort with remote destruction began there, in the orange glow of a sky that once belonged to farmers and fishermen. The fire taught America how to win and how to forget. It taught that domination could be achieved without occupation, that fear could replace diplomacy. And in the triumph of 1945 lay the blueprint for every war that followed, from Korea to Vietnam to the deserts of the 21st century. The United States emerged from the ashes not only victorious, but transformed, its moral compass forever magnetized by the seductive pull of power. And so the nation that once sought to defend freedom learned another lesson instead, that the line between protector and destroyer is drawn not by ideology, but by the heat of the flames we choose to unleash. By the time the summer of 1945 arrived, Japan was no longer a nation of cities. It was a graveyard of experiments. The sky had become a laboratory, and each bombing raid was another data point in humanity's descent into industrialized annihilation. Historians often say that modern warfare reached its climax with the atomic bomb, but in truth, the science of total destruction had already been perfected, not through nuclear fission, but through fire and mathematics. The blueprint for Armageddon was drawn in blue ink, tested over bamboo, and delivered by men who believed efficiency was the highest form of morality. At the heart of that science was an American obsession with optimization. Every target was studied as if it were an engineering problem, not a place where human beings lived. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey cataloged Japanese cities with the precision of accountants: number of buildings, roof materials, density per acre, proximity to water. They learned that most homes were built from thin wood coated in oil-based lacquer, perfect tinder. The engineers concluded that the ideal conditions for maximum destruction were 25% humidity and light wind. These were not soldiers planning a raid.
They were scientists designing a firestorm. Curtis LeMay's team even conducted controlled burns on mock Japanese villages constructed in the Utah desert. They measured how quickly tatami mats ignited, how flames spread across paper walls, how long it took for a roof to collapse. Then they scaled the numbers up, translating household combustion into civic extinction. To those in the command rooms, it was elegant logic. Drop the right combination of incendiaries, and a city could be erased in a single night. And once the formula was proven, the campaign became a production line, efficient, repeatable, unfeeling. Tokyo was only the first act. Nagoya followed, then Osaka, Kobe, Yokohama. Entire cities became ghostly topographies of ash. From the air, they looked like the surface of the moon, gray, cratered, lifeless. Each success fueled the next, and America's military press releases framed it as progress. Japan's industrial heart crippled, they announced, never mentioning that the heart was made of mothers, children, and street vendors. Numbers replaced names. Tons of bombs replaced lives. Yet the terrifying thing about the firebombing campaign was not its brutality, but its rationality. Every act of destruction was justified by charts and memos. The mission was to shorten the war, save Allied lives, and force surrender. In the cold language of policy, morality was reduced to math. If killing 100,000 civilians ended the war a week earlier, it was considered humane. That logic, born in the furnaces of 1945, still whispers through every drone control center and Pentagon briefing today. The American public, thousands of miles away, never saw the faces behind the figures. Newspapers printed victory headlines, not the photographs of Tokyo's rivers clogged with corpses. Radio commentators spoke of courage and technological superiority. Scientists, meanwhile, wrote academic papers on urban combustibility patterns, as if describing forest fires rather than people burning alive. In classrooms and boardrooms alike, destruction was reframed as innovation.
Inside Japan, the experience defied words. Survivors later recalled the sound of the air raids, a deep roar like the ocean collapsing on itself. The air turned to flame. People suffocated before the fire reached them, the heat consuming oxygen faster than lungs could draw breath. Entire neighborhoods vanished in minutes, their existence preserved only as silhouettes seared into walls. Mothers carried the charred bodies of their children, unsure if they were running toward safety or away from it. Even the emperor's broadcasts could no longer disguise the truth. The empire was disintegrating under a rain of fire. And yet, amid the horror, something extraordinary happened. A grim fascination took root among the strategists. The success of incendiary raids convinced many in Washington that there was a scientific path to total victory. Destroy infrastructure, demoralize civilians, and a nation would collapse from within. The concept was elegant, terrible, and addictive. It turned warfare into a system, a predictable sequence of input and output. No longer did generals need to worry about battlefields or bravery. War became a problem of logistics, solvable through data. But there was an unintended consequence. By transforming war into a science, humanity stripped it of its last remnants of soul. Compassion became noise in the data set. When moral questions arose, is this just? Is this necessary? They were dismissed as sentimental. The charts had already spoken. This mindset paved the way for what came next, the belief that there could be a single, ultimate weapon, one so powerful it would end all wars.
The atomic bomb was not born from moral decay, it was born from moral efficiency. In this way, the firebombings of Japan were the bridge between two eras, the age of conventional warfare and the dawn of nuclear logic. They taught the world that total destruction was possible without armies meeting on the ground. And, more dangerously, they proved it could be done cleanly, from a distance, with the push of a button. When Hiroshima burned, the generals would call it necessary. But Tokyo, Nagoya, and Osaka had already taught them how to kill a nation without invading it. The bomb was merely a shortcut, a technological refinement of a principle already tested and perfected: annihilate to save. Today, when we look at satellite images of modern cities, Tokyo, reborn, gleaming with neon and glass, it's hard to imagine that beneath its foundations lie the ashes of a calculated inferno. But the science that destroyed it never disappeared. It evolved. It became algorithms predicting acceptable casualties, heat maps of efficiency, and targeting software that turns neighborhoods into coordinates. The ghost of LeMay still lingers in every military simulation, every phrase like precision strike or surgical bombing. These words sanitize what fire once screamed. The lesson is bitter and uncomfortably clear. Once humanity learns to burn with purpose, it never forgets how. The firestorms of 1945 were not an anomaly. They were a template. They taught the modern world how to rationalize horror, how to quantify suffering, and to call it progress. In the end, the cities turned to dust not because America hated Japan, but because it learned to love control. Fire offered certainty in an uncertain war, and in that certainty, empathy became expendable. The science of total destruction was not merely about defeating an enemy, it was about mastering chaos itself. But mastery has a price, and somewhere between the blueprints and the bomb bays, humanity began to mistake precision for morality. When the smoke cleared over Japan, the lesson was complete. The tools were ready, the conscience subdued. All that remained was a question. If fire could erase a city, what could light brighter than fire erase?
In the final months of 1945, as Japan's cities lay in ashes and its people starved amid ruins, the United States faced a question unlike any in human history. How do you end a war that has already destroyed everything? The answer came not from the battlefield, but from a laboratory, in the quiet corridors of Los Alamos, where a group of physicists had split the atom, and in doing so, split the moral fabric of civilization. The world called it the Manhattan Project. Its architects called it science, but what they built was something older, something biblical, the fire of creation, stolen and weaponized. By July, the firestorm raids had left more than 60 Japanese cities flattened. Industrial production was crippled, the Air Force dismantled, the Navy at the bottom of the sea. Yet Japan refused unconditional surrender. Its leaders hoped for mediation, maybe a softer peace that would spare the emperor. In Washington, patience had expired. The war had consumed millions of lives, and American families wanted closure. The new bomb promised that: swift, decisive, and spectacular. But beneath the language of necessity simmered something more primal: the desire to demonstrate power, to end the war not merely with victory, but with revelation. The men who made the bomb lived in contradiction. J. Robert Oppenheimer quoted the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds," but still delivered his creation with meticulous precision.
General Leslie Groves, the military head of the project, treated it as a logistics triumph. And President Harry Truman, who had assumed office only months earlier after Roosevelt's death, saw the bomb as both weapon and warning. He believed it could save American lives by avoiding an invasion of Japan. But he also knew it would announce to the world, especially to Stalin's Soviet Union, that America now held the future of warfare in its hands. The choice wasn't made in a single meeting. It unfolded through memos, committees, and quiet calculations of death. Some scientists pleaded for a demonstration bomb, detonated over an empty island to prove its power without killing civilians. Others, including Groves and LeMay, dismissed that idea. They argued that only the shock of destruction would compel surrender. Demonstrations are for diplomats, LeMay reportedly said. Wars are for winners. The logic was the same that had justified firebombing: total devastation as a shortcut to peace. The first atomic test on July 16, 1945, changed everything. The desert of New Mexico lit up brighter than the sun. Witnesses felt the heat miles away. The ground shook, and the air itself seemed to gasp. When the dust settled, silence fell, a silence more terrifying than the blast. The scientists cheered, then wept. They had seen the future, and it glowed. 3 weeks later, the Enola Gay lifted off from Tinian Island, carrying a 9,000-pound bomb nicknamed Little Boy. Below lay Hiroshima, a city untouched by previous raids, chosen precisely so the effects could be studied in full. At 8:15 a.m., the bomb exploded 1,900 feet above the city. The sky turned white. Within seconds, 70,000 people ceased to exist. Shadows of human beings were burned into concrete. Skin melted like wax. Rivers boiled. Survivors walked through the inferno with eyes turned to glass. Hiroshima was no longer a place. It was an experiment completed.
When news reached Washington, Truman announced victory in the language of mercy. "We have used it to shorten the agony of war, to save the lives of thousands." The public cheered. Newspapers hailed the dawn of a new age. Few asked what kind of age begins with a mushroom cloud. 3 days later, Nagasaki followed. 2 cities, 2 flashes, and suddenly the world's most ancient nation was on its knees. Emperor Hirohito, his divine aura broken by the light, announced Japan's surrender. The war was over. The age of atomic peace had begun. But even in triumph, unease crept into the American conscience. Many of the men who built the bomb began to doubt its necessity. General Eisenhower later admitted he had opposed its use, believing Japan was already defeated. Admiral Leahy called it barbarous. And Oppenheimer, the man who had unleashed the sun, would spend the rest of his life haunted by the memory of that flash. "The physicists have known sin," he said, "and this is a knowledge they cannot lose." The government, however, had no room for remorse. The atomic bomb became a symbol of moral superiority, a paradoxical peacekeeper that demanded faith in destruction. School children were taught to hide under desks during duck-and-cover drills, as if innocence itself could shield them from radiation. The bomb's existence redefined global politics, creating an arms race disguised as deterrence. And in the ashes of Hiroshima, the United States discovered not only how to end a war, but how to rule through fear. From a certain perspective, Hiroshima was inevitable. The war had trained America to think in absolutes. The firebombings had made annihilation acceptable. The scientists had made apocalypse practical.
Hiroshima was the logical conclusion of an equation begun years earlier in the skies over Tokyo. Total destruction equals total peace. Yet even as the logic held, the morality fractured. How do you justify vaporizing a city to save another? How do you measure the cost of victory in shadows burned into stone? In later decades, historians would argue endlessly over Truman's decision. Was it revenge? Strategy? A warning to Moscow? Perhaps all three. But beneath every theory lies a deeper truth. The atomic bomb was not just an end to World War II. It was the beginning of a new theology. For centuries, humans had prayed to gods for protection. Now, humanity had become its own god, with the power to unmake creation. The question was no longer, could we destroy, but when we would decide to. And so, in August 1945, as mushroom clouds rose over Japan, the world crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The bomb ended one war and began another, an invisible one fought in laboratories, in boardrooms, in the minds of men haunted by the knowledge that peace had been purchased with annihilation. The light that shone over Hiroshima was brighter than vengeance, brighter than victory. It was the light of humanity seeing itself for the first time and recoiling in terror. The Americans called it success. The survivors called it silence. The earth called it history. But somewhere, beneath the radiant cloud, a new question was already forming. If mankind could wield the power of gods, could it also learn to forgive?
When the flames finally died and the mushroom clouds drifted away, the silence that followed was heavier than the destruction itself. Japan was gone, not in the geographic sense, but in spirit. Cities had been replaced by maps of memory, each marked by the geometry of loss. Yet amid the ruins, something almost miraculous began. The slow, painful rebirth of a nation, and the uneasy conscience of its conqueror. America had won the war, but the victory came with a strange aftertaste, the realization that it had looked into the abyss and seen its own reflection staring back. Occupation forces arrived not as invaders, but as architects of a new order. General Douglas MacArthur walked through the ruins of Tokyo like a man inspecting the aftermath of his own sermon. His mission was not only political, but spiritual: to rebuild Japan as a democracy, to turn the ashes into proof that fire could purify as well as destroy. Schools reopened. Censorship was lifted. Women gained the right to vote. The emperor, once divine, became human. His godhood stripped away with a single radio address that began, "The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage." In those words, humility replaced myth, and a defeated empire began to learn the art of living with guilt and survival. For America, the reconstruction of Japan was an act of redemption disguised as policy. The same nation that had incinerated millions now sent food, teachers, and engineers. Factories rose where firestorms once raged. Tokyo became a city of glass and steel, a phoenix that rebuilt itself with almost defiant grace. And yet, beneath every skyscraper lay bones. Beneath every neon light flickered the memory of that night when the sun fell. The ghosts never left. They simply adapted to modernity. Those ghosts began to whisper not only in Japan, but across the Pacific. In America, veterans returned home as heroes, yet many were haunted by what they had seen, or refused to see. Some never spoke of it. Others became preachers, teachers, scientists, activists. They carried the contradiction of their age, pride in victory, shame in the method. Curtis LeMay, unapologetic until his death, insisted he had ended the war. But for every LeMay, there was a survivor of Hiroshima or Tokyo who carried scars that no victory parade could justify. Forgiveness became a fragile truce between memory and necessity. The post-war alliance between the United States and Japan transformed both nations. Enemies became partners, their economies intertwined, their militaries aligned against new adversaries. The irony was cosmic. The two countries that once tried to annihilate each other became symbols of peace and progress. American pop culture flooded Japan. Japanese technology transformed American life. Sony televisions, Toyota cars, Nintendo consoles. These were the children of war, born from the same industrial ambition that once built bombers. Capitalism replaced conquest, and in that exchange, both nations found absolution. But history has a long memory. Each August, as the bells of Hiroshima ring at 8:15 a.m., the silence returns. The same silence that followed the blast. School children release paper lanterns into rivers, their soft glow drifting over water that once boiled. American tourists stand among them, unsure whether to apologize or simply listen. That moment, fragile and weightless, contains everything war tried to erase. Empathy, fragility, the reminder that even after total destruction, humanity persists. Modern America still wrestles with the legacy of that fire. The doctrine of overwhelming force, born from LeMay's precision and Truman's decision, continues to shape global policy. Drones hum over deserts. Generals speak of surgical strikes. Politicians promise safety through superiority. And somewhere in the background, that old arithmetic still whispers. Destruction equals peace. But every new flash of war brings back the ghost of Hiroshima, asking whether the world truly learned anything from the light that blinded it. For Japan, forgiveness was not a single act, but a process woven into its culture. It rebuilt not by forgetting, but by transforming grief into art, architecture, and ritual. The minimalist aesthetics of post-war Japan, its clean lines, its silence, its reverence for impermanence, carry an unspoken acknowledgement of what was lost. The tea ceremony, the cherry blossom festivals, the national obsession with order and harmony, all can be read as collective therapy, an elegant response to chaos. Where America sought to master fire, Japan learned to live beside its memory. And yet, the ghosts remain, not to haunt, but to remind. They live in the photographs of shadows burned into stone walls, in the voices of aging survivors who still describe the day the sun fell. They live in the ethical debates that rage in classrooms, in the documentaries and films that try to explain the unexplainable. Every generation rediscovers the same moral paradox, that the path to peace was paved with ashes. In a sense, both nations were forged in that fire. America learned the cost of unchecked power. Japan learned the price of blind obedience. Together, they built a partnership defined not by domination, but by mutual recognition of what they had endured. It is a fragile balance, one that depends on remembering rather than forgetting. Because forgetting is where history repeats itself, and fire never asks for permission before returning. So perhaps forgiveness, in the end, is not about absolution. It is about awareness,
the willingness to face the flames without pretending they were righteous. The night the sun fell will never be undone, but it can still teach. It can remind us that vengeance disguised as justice always leaves a scar, and that true strength lies not in the power to destroy, but in the courage to understand. And that is why, even now, 80 years later, the story of America's revenge and Japan's rebirth still matters. Because we live in a world built on the lessons they left behind. A world where every act of power echoes through generations, and every spark carries the memory of the fire that once consumed a nation. If you believe history still burns beneath our feet, if you think the past deserves a voice louder than silence, then listen closer. Subscribe, stay, and let these stories remind us that the ghosts of war are not here to curse us. They are here to make sure we never forget how easily fire can become faith, and how long it takes to turn that fire into forgiveness.